it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. I have a colleague, a peer, a friend. We have mutual friends in our industry. An amazing woman, Amy L. Riley, is an internationally renowned speaker, author, consultant. She has over 2 decades of experience in developing leaders in all levels. Her clients have included Cisco Systems, Deloitte, Barclays. These are like big names in the industry, and this is a woman who's been in this world 25 years. Her most recent book, The Courage of a Leader, How to Inspire, Engage, and Get Extraordinary Results, came out, Amy, when? Recently, right?
It's a little bit ago. Time is such a warp.
Seems like COVID. Everything seems recent. Time flies. What's going on here?
It's March of 2021.
And what I love about it is I truly don't think enough of us realize and talk about the courage it takes to lead, to run companies, to run departments, to be that leader, make the decisions. And from the time I heard about your new book, I was like, oh my God, this is spot on. So by the way, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ivy. I'm glad to be here.
So I have to start this off by asking, it's not a lot of companies that are in our space that's been around 25 years. Let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah. Yes.
What brought you here? Like, how did that start for you? Because this whole space was very different 25 years ago.
Yes, I know. You and I have talked about that. Yes. I realized a couple of things, I would say, Ivy. The last few companies where I was internal, they were very different kinds of companies. Retail, manufacturing, their cultures couldn't have been more different. And I did my talent development thing, right? And I realized that I would roll out programs on similar topics, building similar kinds of skills, but they looked and they felt very different because I was working to match the culture, to meet the leaders where they were at. And I thought that was fascinating. Right, I'm doing this process. We're co-creating something in these different organizations, and they look and they feel very different. And I enjoyed getting to learn businesses.
Yeah.
Right. And the last company that I worked for internally, manufacturing in the trucking industry. And Ivy, I took the job because it was going to be a nice challenge of creating a learning and development function globally.
There.
So that was so exciting to me. And I thought, well, this product's not going to be very interesting. I'm not going to like that part at all, but I'm going to do it for these reasons over here. And I ended up being fascinated about air ride suspensions and how this works on trucks and trailers and how the two divisions are different. So I also found out that I love that game of figuring out organizations and how they work and their language and what's important to them and their acronyms.
And I will say, like, I love how you put it as the game, because it's putting the puzzle pieces together, and each company is a little unique in their puzzle, right?
Absolutely.
We have some puzzles that are like, the map of the world, and some puzzles that are, all about animals. And it's seeing in companies and in leaders how the different puzzles are unique, yet how all the pieces intersect.
Yes. Yeah, well said.
So you got into this.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I know, I have to remember that it's not just us talking here, we're actually talking for our listeners here. But I will say, I know when I started this company, it is nothing like the business that Slater Success is today.
Yeah.
What have you seen shift, change, evolve? And what have you learned from that? I know
Ah,
I'm stacking
yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah. Um, yes, you and I've talked that 25 years ago when I was starting this business, the view and the perspective on consultants was much more narrow than it is today. And I ran into a couple of obstacles. One being this perception that consultants are super super expensive. They come in and they study us for a while, and then they leave us with their expert recommendations, and that's not how I wanted to operate with my clients. I want to be a partner. I am a partner. I want to co-create. I want to figure out who you are and what works for you, right? And what are the best puzzle pieces to add to what you've got going on. I also found 25 years ago that there was this idea that in order for you to be a good consultant for my company in my industry, you had to have deep, deep, deep experience in my company and my industry. And I have been delighted to see that shift over time. And for leaders across organizations to get that when somebody has experience across different industries, that just means that they're going to have more ideas to bring. They're going to have more perspectives, right? They're going to have more of a view of like what could fit in my certain set of circumstances.
And it's so true. It's interesting. Years ago, one of the early attorneys I worked with, one of their first questions before we started working together is like, "Oh, so you're a lawyer?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Well, how could you counsel law firms?" I'm like, "It's a
Oh.
business."
Mhm. Mhm.
And one of the important things is I work with businesses that are looking to scale, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what I know how to do. That's what I've
Mhm.
done. That's how, and it's seeing the differences. And that's what I'm loving what you're saying. It's seeing and honing and then being that outside new and fresh perspective of what you bring to the table.
Yes. Yes. I am a big believer, Ivy, in whether I'm looking organizationally or working with an individual, that we work best when we're doing it our way, right? When it's fitting our strengths, our passion,
Right.
the culture, the what's going on in the organization. So, yes, I've seen leadership development done in a variety of ways. I have an arsenal of materials, right, and things that I can draw from, but I'm pulling that together in a unique way for each leader, for each situation, each organization. And I love helping organizations figure out that puzzle of, hey, we've got different leaders at different levels and different areas of our organization that have different needs. And we don't have infinite dollars and resources to throw at this. How do we get the best return on our energy, our bandwidth,
Right.
our efforts?
So where does the courage piece come?
Ah, yeah.
From
So,
your perspective and your vision, because and I listeners, just so you know, why I'm clarifying this question is like, well, of course we need courage. Like that's like that's a given. Of course we need courage. Every day we need courage.
yeah.
Yet when we look at leadership, where does the courage piece come as leaders and as you're working, and why that piece has been so important to you, Amy?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Ivy, it wasn't with me 25 years ago. It emerged when I noticed that every time I was impressed or inspired by what a leader was doing, they were demonstrating true courage in that moment. And then I began to catalog that, if you will. And I created the Courage of a Leader 4 pillars.
Okay.
The courage to be authentically you. When you're being
That
yourself.
is the scariest thing, the scariest thing that it took me years to have the courage to show up with 100% me.
Yeah.
transparent,
Mm-hmm.
out there, good, bad, ugly,
Mm-hmm.
with a little bit of my potty mouth from my years in printing,
Yeah.
with with the courage to tell it like it is at all times.
Yes.
Um, it took me years to work on the inner portions of me to show up every day 100% authentically me. I have to tell you, hands down.
Yeah. And that's the courage to look and be aware and to intentionally choose to show that to the world, even though that can feel
And
vulnerable.
it feels so vulnerable. And it's that choice that you're saying. You say it so well, the choice to show it out there, to be out there with it at all times.
Yeah. And what's been the difference of doing so, Ivy?
I remember my mom, and I will say this. I remember my mom saying, I called her out. Now my mom today has a form of dementia, and it's a very different experience. So I'm going back a bunch of years a bit. And we were sitting at lunch, and we were just with a group of people, and she like just 100% said something. And I was like, Mom, I can't believe like you just out there said that. She
Yeah.
goes, it comes with age, Ivy. The older you get, you give a blank less, and you're going to say it like it is. And she goes, and
Mhm.
if you're smart, you're going to start doing it sooner than later.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And you've already said the second of the courage of a leader, four pillars, the courage to say what needs to be said.
Yeah.
Right. So that could be that straight talk that's needed in that moment. It could be having a team member's back. It could be saying, we need to take this division in a new direction, and we're going to do it. The third pillar is the courage to trust the legacy. And
Tell me more about that.
yeah,
Tell me
that's
more about that, because
your,
that sounds, go.
yeah, it's the courage to trust your leadership legacy. Speaking to you and everybody listening, right? And our leadership legacy is the purpose of our leadership. It's, I believe a legacy is something that we can be fully living into and leaving behind every day in every interaction. And when we know the purpose of our leadership, and some people, Ivy, have that really specific purpose, like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be the interim CFO, and I'm going to leave this organization better than when I came in, right? Other folks have one like, I implement ERP systems, right? And I come in and that's what I do. Other folks have a leadership legacy that's around a leadership trait.
Okay.
I simplify and I streamline, or I show care and compassion, or I get stuff done with global teams, right? So that, and there's an infinite number of ways your leadership legacy can look and sound. But the exciting part is when we uncover it and then we live that purpose, and then that purpose calls us forward. So trusting that legacy.
Yeah. It's interesting when we think about purpose,
Yeah.
okay? And, you know, Simon Sinek talks about purpose, and many others talk about purpose. And I used to think about it. It's like, okay, what's my purpose? And that would drive me forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me a long, long time to say, wow, as I'm driving forward, what's the impact that I'm leaving behind? And that's that legacy piece. And it's interesting to me, as we always talk, is the combination, the link between the purpose and the legacy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, especially when we're younger leaders, we are like, I'm not ready to think about legacy, right? Like I was, and I remember early stages in my 40s, I was like, oh, no, I'll get there. I don't need to think about my legacy yet. I don't need to think about my legacy yet. I'm not that old. I'm not that old.
Yeah.
And it's not about age. And it took me a long time to figure this out. Um, Listeners, if you're new to her success story, it takes you just a minute to realize I'm completely transparent here.
Great.
which is what Amy and I are talking about.
Yes, yes.
Um, but it took me a while to be solid within myself that understand that purpose isn't a legacy is not about age.
Yeah.
Legacy is what we leave behind at all ages.
Yes.
And the legacy makes such an impact, and it's the ability to make that impact to others.
Yes. I
I
couldn't
love how you tie that to purpose,
yeah.
because I know I early on never saw it that way.
I do like that, and I like the challenge inside of that. And of course, I've had people question, well, why would an emerging leader or someone's new in their career, they haven't had enough experience or know themselves enough or enough influence to be able to declare a leadership legacy. And I say no. I have
Oh, no.
seen some of the most powerful work done with folks younger in career, emerging leaders who declare this is my leadership legacy and start fully living into that.
Yeah,
They're making an impact in every interaction that they have. And Ivy, if they don't get it exactly right, that's
that's
fine. They're
okay.
they're gonna they're on the right track. Right? It's just fine tuning that is needed, and they're going to find that out sooner rather than later and be able to make those adjustments and clarify in their minds.
And I think in the world that we're living in today, there's an enormous amount of companies that are being built and scaled by younger and younger people.
Yeah.
And they're leaning into this work on the early stage,
Yes.
which is so amazing to
Exactly.
see.
Yeah.
And there's an expression that goes, we're all leaders at all times. It's how we choose to lead.
Yeah.
And that's whether we're 13-year-old girls out there,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
10-year-old on the playground,
Mm-hmm.
the 30-year-old, the 40, 50 or up. And it's how we choose to see ourselves and lead where we are when we are and can continue to grow and scale that.
Yes, Ivy, that is another aspect that I love about someone declaring for themselves, this is my leadership legacy, this is my purpose. Because then we're on the lookout for where it's needed. Right. And we think about like, when we show up as a meeting and whether we have the formal role of facilitator or leader in that meeting or in that project that you're discussing, we can be looking for what's missing here, right? What can I put into this conversation? Oh, I'm someone that generates participation. Ivy hasn't spoken up today. She usually does. Let's check in with her.
In on her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's leadership that we can be bringing in all situations.
I love that. I truly do. I truly do. And the fourth pillar.
The courage to be bold and create the extraordinary. I think, Ivy, it's really easy right now to just get in reactionary mode. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm just responding to my inboxes and my Slack and my
And my
text
text messages and my Slack and my Teams and my this and my that.
right? And then all of a sudden, a day, a
A
week,
day's
a month
over.
has gone by and we're in reactionary mode.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, this is what I want to be about. These are my priorities. These are my big rocks. This is what I'm going for. And to also get out of that cynicism. Yes, we have real challenges in our world, in our marketplace today, right? And it can be easy to get bogged down by that. Here's another supply chain issue. Here's another vendor asking for this, right? And even internally, like they don't get it. They're never going to get on board with this. When we find ourselves using that they language, right? How are we going to influence and impact and make it different inside of that situation? So how are we going to show up boldly and in extraordinary ways every day? Takes something. Takes courage.
It does take courage. And so I want to ask you this, Amy. In growing and scaling this and looking at this company, it is in a 25-year company, in a 25-year business and a consulting company, and how you've led it. businesses have changed over time, the way business looks at consultants, some coaching, that has all been a huge evolution over the years.
Yes.
What have you seen and what has surprised you recently and where we are?
Ooh, what has surprised me recently? Yeah. That's an interesting question for me because doing what I do, being the one-on-one coach, being the trusted advisor for organizations, for leadership teams, I often work to not be surprised. Right? Because I don't I never want to have a jaw drop look on my face like you can't tell me that or you can't say that,
Right.
right? I want to be a space where people can show up and say everything.
Anything and everything. 100%.
Good, bad, and ugly, yeah.
Yep.
It's acknowledgement is about both, all sides of the coin. Being able to show up and celebrate truly our successes and be able to show up and say, oh, like this is a kick in the stomach, right? This did not turn out the way that I was expecting. I am delighted to see some shifts in our industry. I think this gig economy is super exciting. And for people to be able to come together with their complementary strengths in a team and make something happen in a shorter period of time. So I love shifting some mindsets around that yes, we can build trust quickly. We can come together if we have
Right.
those really intentional conversations about who are we, what are our strengths, what are not our strengths, right? How do we very overtly use each other's strengths and have the most effective and efficient and outcome producing experience that we can.
And let's, what do you see going on in the gig economy?
Yeah. In terms of leadership?
In terms of leadership, yes, staying on point. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's great. Um, yes. So I'm giving a keynote next week and then a workshop, and we're going to talk about the cycle of productivity in that. So I'm seeing in the gig economy that it can be really easy to start, plan, right? And then phase two, execute, right? Make progress.
Right.
Phase three, complete. And then phase four is acknowledge and celebrate, which refuels us for the next start.
Correct.
We are often cutting off number four and not acknowledging, not getting our lessons learned, because it can feel really easy. Okay, here's this team that's coming together to do this thing, and then we're gonna dissemble and then, potentially reorganize in a new way with different people. So it's exciting. There's people coming together for different things, but it can be hard to keep that high level of performance going over time if we're not doing that acknowledgement and celebration piece.
I
So,
think you are spot on. I cannot agree more. Um, I think about it as, and I am not a runner. So I preface this by saying I am not a runner.
okay.
Um, but marathon runners,
Yes.
right? When they cross that finish line, if they don't celebrate the success, and they're like, okay, well, next week is the marathon is here, or next month the marathon is there. So I'm gonna, right? If we don't celebrate that success, what's the point of going to the next marathon?
So I am a runner, Ivy. And yeah, so I totally get that. And celebrating it and acknowledging it, even when we didn't feel good crossing the finish line, or we didn't meet our time goal, right? Or we walked more than we wanted to, or whatever it
Whatever
is,
it is.
there's still acknowledgement of what was the experience for me, acknowledging if there was disappointment inside of it. Yeah, so I think a leadership trait that's becoming more and more important is self-acknowledgement, right? So if I'm not in a system that is naturally creating for that, how am I creating that for me and the colleagues that I'm working with, right? And even if there's not that opportunity to do it in a group, how do we do it for ourselves? Because things are fast moving.
If we, there's I do this with all my clients. We start every call with successes, with
Yes.
acknowledging successes. And I have been known occasionally to give books out for people to daily write their successes. Because it's so important for all of us to acknowledge what is working, because we live in a world that dissects what's not working.
Yes. Yes.
And that power shift to acknowledge and see what is working, we get to learn and grow so much from there. That doesn't mean we don't ignore, that doesn't mean we ignore what's not working, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that we're not going to analyze both,
Yeah.
but we got the analyzing of what's not working hands down, guys.
Yes. It is so easy to see the gap in front of us and not see the gap that we've closed behind us. So I love that you are making that a regular practice
I
when
think
you're
I think it's
working with your
important to be
clients.
a
Yeah.
regular, yeah. So, Amy, what is one tip you could share with our listeners today that you would suggest for leaders in their journey to gain and embrace their courage to lead?
Yeah, it might be an obvious one, Ivy, but it would be declaring that leadership legacy. Looking at what are your strengths? What are your passions and your interests, right? Where do you naturally provide value? And sometimes we need to ask other people about it because sometimes our strengths are so inherent to us. That's just how I operate. That's just how I
Yeah,
show up. And it can be easy for me to dismiss that is different than how that provides great value because other people don't operate in that same way.
I
So
love it.
looking at your strengths, your values, right? And declaring for yourself, what is my leadership legacy? And begin to intentionally look at how do I bring that to every relationship, every interaction,
Yeah.
every project?
I love that. And I love the owning it. That declaration gives us the ability to own our best strengths. And that goes along the same lines as the successes of seeing what's working, owning our greatest strengths. I
Yeah.
love it, Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's gonna feel great. And let me warn you, there's gonna be some days where you're gonna be like,
Oh,
oh,
it's going to be an
I
itchy
gotta
sweater, huh?
I gotta practice what I preach today. It's gonna take courage
Yeah,
some days to show up and fully live into that leadership legacy. But
I
it's
love
there
that.
to call you forward.
Amy Riley, I appreciate you. I love the work that you're doing. I appreciate you having you as a colleague, a peer, and a friend. Listeners, I say at this point in the show, take a breath. And what's the one piece today that resonated with you? What's your one takeaway, that one aha moment? Write it down somewhere. Doesn't matter if it's your phone, a post-it, a journal, whatever's your thing. No judgment, no care. And then make a decision. What's going to be the one thing you're going to do from that? And that is our gift to you today from her success story. Amy, thanks for joining me here today.
This was a great pleasure. The time went by so quickly. Thank you,
It
Ivy.
does. It's amazing. If I don't keep my eye on the clock some days, I'm like, oh boy, I have a commitment to this time-wise.
Yeah.
Listeners, thank you for joining us here today. Thanks for joining Amy and I. If this resonated with you, if this was helpful for you, please pass it forward to somebody who would be helpful too. Feel free to hit subscribe. We come into your inbox every Monday. And see you next time with more great interviews and great guests. Thank you.
Don't need your approval anymore, 'cause I've got mine.